What happens when a man who has everything decides he's entitled to even more? We're talking about Richard Sterling, the tech mogul billionaire, a man who graced the covers of Forbes and Fortune. He thought his divorce would be a simple transaction, a footnote in his legendary career. That's why he had the audacity to walk into the Supreme Court, not just with his high-powered legal team, but with his much younger mistress, Sienna, clinging to his arm. He smirked at his wife of 20 years, Penelope expecting her to crumble. But he made one catastrophic miscalculation. He forgot who he was dealing with. What the judge revealed next wasn't just a legal bombshell. It was an explosion that vaporized an empire and exposed a lie 2 decades in the making. The sterile wood-paneled courtroom buzzed with the low hum of anticipation. It wasn't just another high-asset divorce. It was a public execution, or so Richard Sterling intended. He made his entrance as if walking onto a red carpet, dressed in a bespoke Tom Ford suit that probably cost more than the average car. His silver hair was perfectly coiffed, and a Patek Philippe watch gleamed on his wrist as he waved away a throng of reporters. But the real spectacle was the woman on his arm. Sienna Carmichael, a 25-year-old Instagram model with eyes as blue and vacant as a chlorinated pool, was poured into a crimson dress that left little to the imagination. She held Richard's hand possessively, her diamond bracelet, a recent gift, catching the harsh courthouse lighting and scattering it like shrapnel. They were a portrait of audacious disrespect, a living, breathing insult to the woman sitting alone on the opposite bench. That woman was Penelope Hayes. At 48, Penelope looked to the untrained eye like a woman faded by time and quiet suburban life. Her charcoal grey suit was tasteful but not flashy. Her brown hair was pulled back into a simple, elegant chignon. She wore no ostentatious jewelry, only the thin gold wedding band that now felt like a shackle. She sat with a ramrod-straight posture, her hands folded calmly in her lap. To Richard, she was a relic of his past, the starter wife who had served her purpose and was now an obstacle to his new life. He looked at her and felt a flicker of pity quickly extinguished by annoyance. This whole process was a tedious waste of his valuable time. His lawyer, Alistair Finch, a shark in a Savile Row suit, leaned in. "It's all in hand, Richard. We've offered her a generous settlement, 20 million the Hamptons house, and an annuity. Far more than she's entitled to. She has no claim on Sterling Innovations. The company is yours, built by your genius. The judge will see that. Her refusal to accept is just greed." Richard nodded his gaze, flicking dismissively towards Penelope. $20 million is a rounding error for me, Alistair, but it's the principle. She didn't build a single thing. She planned dinner parties and redecorated the houses I paid for. She should be grateful. He caught Penelope's eye across the courtroom. He expected to see fear, sadness, perhaps desperation. Instead, he saw nothing. A calm, placid lake. It was unnerving. He had always been able to read her, to manipulate her quiet nature. But this version of Penelope was a stranger. His mistress Sienna squeezed his hand. "Don't let her bother you, baby." She whispered, her voice loud enough for the first few rows to hear. "Soon this will all be over, and we can finally be together properly. Just think of the yacht in Monaco." Richard gave her a reassuring smile, the one he reserved for magazine photographers. He felt powerful, invincible. He was Richard Sterling, the visionary behind Sterling Innovations, a tech behemoth worth an estimated $12 billion. He had started with nothing but an idea and raw ambition. Penelope had been there, yes, a supportive partner in the early lean years. But support didn't equate to equity. Love didn't translate to stock options. On the other side of the aisle, Penelope's lawyer, Ava Chen, a sharp-witted woman with an unassuming demeanor and a mind like a steel trap, placed a hand on her client's shoulder. "Are you ready, Penelope?" Penelope took a slow, deep breath and finally looked away from her husband. "I've been ready for a long time, Ava," she said, her voice steady and clear. "Let's begin." The bailiff's voice boomed. "All rise. The Honorable Judge Evelyn Davies presiding." A stern, intelligent-looking woman in her late 60s took the bench. Judge Davies had a reputation for being meticulous fair and utterly immune to the theatrics of wealth and power. Her eyes scanned the room, lingering for a moment on Richard and Sienna, a flicker of something unreadable in her expression, before settling on the documents before her. "We are here today to hear the divorce proceedings of Sterling versus Hayes." Judge Davies began, her voice cutting through the tension. "Mr. Finch, you may begin." Alistair Finch stood up, radiating confidence. He launched into a grand narrative of Richard Sterling, the self-made titan of industry. He painted a picture of a man who worked 100-hour weeks, who risked everything on a dream, while his wife enjoyed the fruits of his labor. He presented Penelope as a traditional homemaker who, while appreciated for her domestic contributions, had no role, no input, and no legal claim on the colossal enterprise that was Sterling Innovations. "Your Honor," Finch concluded with a flourish, "Mr. Sterling, in his immense generosity, has made an offer that far exceeds the legal requirement for a spouse in her position. We ask the court to validate this settlement and finalize this dissolution so both parties can move on." Judge Davies listened patiently, her face impassive. When Finch sat down, she turned her gaze to the other table. "Ms. Chen, your response—" Ava Chen rose. She was the antithesis of Finch. No grand gestures, no booming rhetoric. She spoke with a quiet, lethal precision. "Your Honor," she said calmly, "we reject Mr. Sterling's generous offer. We reject it not because it is insufficient, but because it is based on a fundamentally false premise." A murmur went through the courtroom. Richard shifted in his seat, a frown creasing his brow. Finch jumped to his feet. "Objection. Ms. Chen is casting aspersions. The premise is fact. Mr. Sterling founded and built Sterling Innovations." "Is it a fact, Mr. Finch?" Ava Chen asked, turning her head slightly. "Or is it just a very well-told story?" Judge Davies held up a hand. "I'll allow it. Proceed, Ms. Chen. But be warned, your argument had better be grounded in evidence." "Thank you, Your Honor," Ava said. "It is. The evidence we will present today will prove that my client Penelope Hayes is not entitled to half of Sterling Innovations." Richard smirked, leaning back in his chair. He exchanged a triumphant glance with Sienna. He knew it. Penelope's lawyer was admitting defeat. Ava Chen paused for a beat, letting the silence hang in the air before delivering the blow. "My client is not entitled to half of the company." She repeated, her voice ringing with clarity. "Because she already owns all of it." The courtroom erupted 22 years earlier, 2003. The story Richard Sterling told himself and the world began in a dusty garage in Palo Alto. The reality began in a small, cramped apartment in a less fashionable part of town, with peeling paint and a window that overlooked a brick wall. Richard was a bartender back then, brimming with charisma and grand ideas, but lacking the discipline or the capital to make them reality. He was handsome, charming, and could talk his way into or out of anything. He dreamt of being a tech visionary, like Steve Jobs or Bill Gates, But his days were spent pouring drinks, and his nights were spent sketching out half-baked business plans on cocktail napkins. He met Penelope Hayes at a university library. She wasn't a student there. She was a freelance coder and data analyst, a ghost in the machine for several burgeoning tech startups. She was brilliant, but intensely private. While Richard was a firework, all noise and bright light, Penelope was a deep, quiet river. She had a mind that saw patterns and possibilities where others saw only chaos. She had come from a family of academics, people who valued intellect over attention. They fell in love quickly. He was drawn to her quiet strength and her sharp mind, which he found exotic. She was drawn to his boundless energy and his unshakable belief in himself, a confidence she had always lacked. One evening over cheap takeout Chinese food, Richard was passionately explaining his latest idea, a software platform that could streamline supply chain logistics for small businesses. It was a good idea, but it was just that, an idea. He had no code, no model, no capital. Penelope listened patiently, then walked over to her beaten-up desktop computer. "The core problem isn't just streamlining," she said, her fingers flying across the keyboard. "It's predictive analysis. You need a system that doesn't just track inventory, but predicts demand based on dozens of variables, market trends, weather patterns, social media sentiment. That's the real value." Over the next 6 months, while Richard continued to work at the bar, Penelope dedicated herself to building the foundation of that system. She wrote the core algorithm, a piece of code so elegant and powerful it was years ahead of its time. She worked late into the night, fueled by coffee and a silent, burning ambition of her own. She called the project Nexus. The problem, as always, was money. They needed servers, patents, a small office, and at least one other programmer. They were flat broke. "We could try to find venture capitalists," Richard suggested, frustrated. "But they'll want 80% of the company before we've even started." That's when Penelope revealed her secret. "My parents," she began hesitantly. "They weren't wealthy, but they were very careful. They left me a trust fund when they passed away. It's managed by Morgan Stanley." Richard's eyes widened. "A trust fund, Penny? Why didn't you tell me how much?" "It's significant," she said. "Around $2 million. But there are conditions. My father was very protective. The trust was structured so that the capital could only be used for a business venture where I was the sole proprietor. He didn't trust anyone else with my future." Richard's face fell. His dream right there, but locked behind a door he couldn't open. Sole proprietor, so. "I'm out." Penelope looked at him, at the man she loved, whose ambition she wanted to nurture. She saw his charisma, his ability to sell a vision, to be the face of an enterprise in a way she never could be. She hated public speaking, hated networking. He thrived on it. They were two halves of a whole. She had a plan that was both a loving sacrifice and a masterfully strategic move. "No," she said softly. "Not out. We form the company, a Delaware C Corp, legally on all the incorporation documents filed with the state. I will be listed as the 100% shareholder funded directly from the trust as per its bylaws. This satisfies the legal requirement of the trust." She paused, taking his hands. "But publicly, Richard, it will be your company. We'll call it Sterling Innovations. You will be the CEO, the president, the chairman. You will be the face and the voice. We'll draw up a private internal agreement just between us. It will state that you are the acting CEO, granted a generous salary and a significant performance-based bonus structure tied to the company's growth. We'll even call your bonus profit sharing so you feel like an owner. But the equity, the actual ownership, that has to remain with me to unlock the funds. Richard was hesitant. So I'd be an employee. Your employee. The word tasted like ash in his mouth. You'd be the leader, she corrected gently. The visionary. No one ever has to know about the legal structure. This is just paperwork to satisfy my father's lawyers. In the real world, in the press to our future employees, you are the founder. I'll stay in the background as chief technology officer, maybe. I prefer the work anyway, not the spotlight. It's the only way, Richard. It's our only path. Blinded by the sudden proximity of $2 million and the promise of his name in lights, Richard agreed. He saw it as a temporary legal hurdle, a formality. In his mind, his vision and her money were merging. Over time, that distinction would blur until it vanished completely. They signed 2 sets of documents that week. The first were the public-facing incorporation papers for Sterling Innovations, which listed Richard Sterling as CEO and president. The second was a deeply confidential ironclad private agreement drafted by the trust's attorneys. It explicitly stated Penelope Hayes was the sole capital contributor and 100% owner of all shares, and that Richard Sterling was an employee at will, granted the title of CEO. It was notarized and filed away in a safe deposit box at a bank managed by the trust. And so Sterling Innovations was born. Fueled by Penelope's capital and built on the foundation of her code, but with Richard Sterling's name on the door. He was a brilliant salesman, and he sold the story of the self-made man to the world, and eventually even to himself. The first 10 years were a whirlwind of success. Richard, freed from financial constraints and powered by Penelope's revolutionary software, was unstoppable. He was a master at networking, at wooing investors for secondary rounds of funding, all of which were legally structured as debt financing or non-voting shares to avoid diluting Penelope's sole ownership, and at building a cult of personality around himself. He was the charismatic genius on the cover of magazines. Penelope, meanwhile, willingly took a back seat. She led the tech development team, working quietly and diligently out of the spotlight. She was listed on the company website as head of R&D. Most employees saw her as the quiet, slightly awkward wife of the brilliant boss. They had no idea that the entire infrastructure they worked on was the product of her mind. When they married 2 years after founding the company, she took his last name for social purposes, but legally remained Penelope Hayes on all her financial and corporate documents, a detail Richard found sentimental and never questioned. Their marriage was for a time a partnership. He was the rocket fuel, she was the guidance system. But as the company's valuation soared from millions to billions, the balance of power in their relationship began to shift, at least in Richard's mind. He started to believe his own press. He forgot the cramped apartment, the trust fund, the private agreement. He remembered only his speeches, his deals, his triumphs. He saw Penelope not as his partner, but as part of his domestic support system. The woman who ran their sprawling Atherton mansion, who raised their 2 children, who organized the charity galas that burnished his public image. Her role as head of R&D became more of an honorary title in his eyes. He promoted others above her men who were good at corporate politics, and slowly she retreated further from the day-to-day operations, focusing on long-term strategy and new tech incubation from her home office. A gilded kin he had built for her. The first major crack appeared 5 years ago. Richard, drunk on power and adulation, began to change. He became dismissive, arrogant, and cruel in small ways. He'd mock her ideas in front of others, calling them quaint. He traveled constantly, his explanations for his whereabouts becoming vague. Then came Sienna Carmichael. Penelope discovered the affair not through a stray text message or a lipstick stain, but through a corporate expense report. She still had top-level access to the company's financials, a privilege Richard had forgotten or deemed unimportant. She saw a charge for a $50,000 diamond bracelet from Harry Winston, coded under client entertainment. A few clicks later, she saw charges for suites at the Four Seasons in Paris, private jet charters to St. Bart's, a lease on a penthouse apartment on Park Avenue, all billed to Sterling Innovations, all for a client named Sienna Carmichael. There was a moment of profound, soul-crushing pain. The betrayal was absolute. But Penelope did not cry. She did not scream. The quiet river of her personality froze over into a sheet of ice. The years of being underestimated, of being slowly erased from her own story, had forged a core of steel within her. She didn't confront him. A confrontation would have been emotional, messy, and ultimately pointless. He would lie, charm his way out of it, and paint her as a hysterical, jealous wife. Instead, she acted. She made a phone call, not to a marriage counselor, but to the top marital and corporate litigator in the state, Ava Chen. In a quiet, discreet office overlooking the San Francisco Bay, Penelope laid out the entire story. She told Ava about the early days, the trust fund, the algorithm, she wrote. And then she produced her trump card, a certified copy of the private ownership agreement retrieved from the bank's safe deposit box, where it had sat dormant for 2 decades. Ava Chen read the document, her expression shifting from professional interest to utter astonishment. She looked up at the quiet, dignified woman sitting opposite her. She wasn't just looking at a wronged wife. She was looking at the sole, undisputed owner of a multi-billion-dollar corporation who had been living as a ghost in her own machine. He's been using corporate funds to finance his affair. Penelope stated, her voice devoid of emotion. He's diluted the company's value with his recklessness and his ego. This document is ironclad, Penelope. Ava said, her mind already racing through the legal possibilities. The terms of the trust, the source of the capital, the notarized signatures. There is no ambiguity here. You own Sterling Innovations, all of it. I know, Penelope replied. When he asked for a divorce a month ago, he told me he would be fair. He offered to let me keep the house he thought he paid for. A humorless smile touched her lips. I think it's time we corrected the narrative. The strategy was set. They would let Richard file first. They would let him and his shark, Alistair Finch, lay out their entire case based on the public story. They would let him walk into court with his mistress on his arm, the pinnacle of his hubris. They would give him all the rope he needed, and then, with one simple, undeniable document, they would let him hang himself. For the next 6 months, Penelope played the part of the broken, defeated wife. She was quiet, acquiescent. She moved into the guest wing of the mansion. Richard saw it as her slow acceptance of the inevitable. He had no idea he was a king, living on borrowed time in a castle that had never been his. Back in the courtroom, the shockwave from Ava Chen's declaration, "My client already owns all of it," had subsided into a tense, disbelieving silence. Alistair Finch was on his feet, his face flushed with anger. Your Honor, this is outrageous. It's a desperate theatrical ploy. We have 2 decades of public records, tax filings, EC documents that list Mr. Sterling as the chairman and primary stakeholder. Is Ms. Chen suggesting these are all fraudulent, not fraudulent, Mr. Finch? Ava replied calmly. Just incomplete. They tell a story, but not the whole story. With the court's permission, I'd like to call Mr. Richard Sterling to the stand. Judge Davies nodded. Mr. Sterling, please approach. Richard walked to the witness stand, a look of profound irritation on his face. This was a circus. He shot a venomous glare at Penelope, who met his gaze without flinching. Ava Chen approached the stand. Mr. Sterling, thank you for your time. Let's start at the beginning. You are credited as the founder of Sterling Innovations. Is that correct? That is correct, Richard said, his voice booming with authority. And you founded it in 2003 out of your garage with nothing but an idea and a dream. Yes, it's a well-documented story. Indeed, Ava said, picking up a file. Let's talk about the initial capitalization. A dream is wonderful, Mr. Sterling, but a company requires capital. Where did the initial seed money come from? Richard hesitated for a fraction of a second. I secured private funding from personal savings and family loans. Family loans, Ava pressed. Could you specify which family members your parents were of modest means? And you were a bartender at the time, correct? I had savings, he snapped. This was over 20 years ago. I don't recall the exact details. Let me help you, Ava said, her voice turning sharp. Isn't it true that the initial capital infusion into the corporate account for Sterling Innovations on May 12, 2003, was a single wire transfer in the amount of $2 million? Richard's eyes narrowed. That sounds approximately correct. And isn't it true, Ava continued, walking towards the clerk, that this wire transfer did not come from your personal account or from any of your family members, but rather from a trust account managed by Morgan Stanley, an account held in the name of one Penelope Hayes? She handed a document to the clerk. Your Honor, I submit as Exhibit A a certified statement from Morgan Stanley detailing the 2003 transfer. Judge Davies examined the document. Alistair Finch rushed over to look at it, his face paling slightly. This money was a gift, Richard stammered from the stand. A gift from my then-girlfriend to help start my company. She believed in me. A gift, Ava mused. A $2 million gift with no paperwork. That seems unlikely. But let's move on. Let's talk about the core product. The Nexus logistics algorithm that was the foundation of the company's success. You've often referred to it as your brainchild. I conceived of the platform, Richard said defensively. I set the vision. But you didn't write the code, did you, Mr. Sterling? You have no programming background. I had a team. And who led that team? Who wrote the initial 70,000 lines of code for the base algorithm? Ava asked. Richard fell silent. He glanced at Penelope, who was watching the exchange with the quiet intensity of a hawk. You don't know, do you? Ava pressed. The person who wrote that code was Penelope Hayes. She worked for 18 hours a day for 6 months in your tiny apartment to build the very engine of the company you call yours. Objection, Finch shouted. Relevance. This is ancient history. It is the most relevant history there is. Your Honor, Judge Davies said, her eyes fixed on Richard. Objection overruled. Answer the question, Mr. Sterling. Penelope. She handled the technical side. Richard mumbled, his voice losing its confident timbre. That was her role. Her role, Ava repeated. And what was your role exactly besides setting the vision? I was the CEO. I built the business. I made the deals, hired the people. I put us on the map. He boomed, his frustration boiling over. That company is worth $12 billion because of me. So you believe you are entitled to the fruits of that success? Absolutely 100%. Thank you, Mr. Sterling, Ava said softly. You've been very clear. She walked back to her table as Richard, fuming, stepped down from the stand. He thought he had weathered the storm. He thought it was just a pathetic attempt to embarrass him. He sat down next to Sienna and took her hand, trying to project an aura of calm control. He was still the king. Ava Chen stood and addressed the judge. Your Honor, Mr. Sterling's testimony has been illuminating. He believes the company is his because he was the public face, the deal-maker. He has conveniently forgotten who provided the seed capital and the foundational technology. But feelings and public narratives are not what matters in this court. Legally binding agreements are. She picked up a single leather-bound document from her table. Mr. Sterling mentioned that Penelope's $2 million was a gift. That is false. It was an investment from her family trust, an investment that came with strict, non-negotiable conditions. The primary condition was that Penelope Hayes must be the sole legal proprietor of any venture funded by it. Alistair Finch laughed out loud, a short, sharp, disbelieving bark. This is absurd. If such a thing were true, there would be a document. And after 20 years of SEC filings and audits, such a document would have surfaced. It does not exist. Ava Chen looked at him, a slight, almost pitying smile on her face. Oh, but it does exist, Mr. Finch, she said. It has simply been waiting for the right moment to be seen. She walked towards the judge's bench, the leather-bound document held in her hand, like a sacred text. Your Honor, I present Exhibit B, the private shareholder and executive employment agreement for Sterling Innovations, dated May 14, 2003, executed by the attorneys of the Hayes Family Trust. The room fell into a deathly silence. Every eye was on that document. Richard Sterling stared at it, his mind refusing to process what was happening. That forgotten piece of paper, that formality from 2 decades ago. It couldn't be. This document, Ava announced, her voice resonating in the still air, was a precondition for the release of the trust funds. It stipulates in clear, unambiguous language that 100% of the founding shares of Sterling Innovations are the sole property of Penelope Hayes. It further stipulates that Mr. Richard Sterling is appointed as Chief Executive Officer, an employee at will for a designated salary and a performance-based bonus package. She handed the document to Judge Davies. It is signed, Your Honor, by Penelope Hayes and by Richard Sterling. The silence in the courtroom was so profound, it felt like a physical weight. All the air had been sucked out of the room. Richard Sterling sat frozen in his chair, his face a mask of chalky disbelief. The bravado, the arrogance, the smug certainty, it all evaporated in an instant, replaced by a raw, primal panic. His eyes were wide, fixed on the document now in Judge Davies's hands, as if it were a venomous snake. Sienna Carmichael beside him finally seemed to grasp the magnitude of what was happening. Her perfectly manicured hand slipped from Richard's arm. The billionaire she had attached herself to was suddenly looking small. Alistair Finch, for the first time in his illustrious career, was utterly speechless. He looked from Ava Chen's calm, triumphant face to his client's crumbling facade. He had been played. He had built his entire case on a foundation of sand, and the tide was now coming in. Judge Davies spent what felt like an eternity examining the document. She read every line, her expression unreadable. She turned the pages slowly, her gaze lingering on the final page with the 2 signatures, side by side, from a different lifetime. One Penelope's was neat and precise. The other, Richard's, was a confident, flamboyant scrawl, the signature of a man who believed he was signing a mere formality on his way to greatness. Finally, she looked up, her eyes sweeping over the courtroom before landing squarely on Richard. "Mr. Sterling," she said, her voice devoid of any warmth, "is this your signature?" She had the clerk carry the document over to the defense table. Richard stared at it. He couldn't deny it. It was his. He remembered that day now, a vague, hazy memory of signing a stack of papers in a stuffy lawyer's office. He had been so focused on the $2 million on the future on the name Sterling Innovations that the fine print had seemed irrelevant. Penelope had told him it was just a legal hoop to jump through for her family's trust. He had trusted her, or rather, he hadn't cared enough to distrust her. I signed it," he stammered, his voice a hoarse whisper. But it was a formality, an understanding. The company was always meant to be mine. An understanding does not supersede a legally binding contract. "Mr. Sterling," Judge Davies said sternly, "especially not one drafted by trust attorneys and executed as a condition of a multi-million-dollar investment. This document is not an understanding. It is an instrument of ownership." She turned to Alastair Finch. "Miss Finch, do you have any evidence to refute the validity of this agreement?" Finch, pale and flustered, could only shake his head. "No, Your Honor. We were unaware of this document's existence." The admission was a death knell for his case. Judge Davies leaned forward, her gaze withering. "Then let me be perfectly clear for everyone in this room. The story of the self-made man, Richard Sterling, is a fiction. A compelling fiction, but a fiction nonetheless. The evidence presented today is irrefutable. The seed capital for Sterling Innovations came from a trust belonging solely to Penelope Hayes. The foundational intellectual property was created solely by Penelope Hayes. And the legal ownership of 100% of the company was and has always been vested solely with Penelope Hayes, as stipulated by this contract, signed by Mr. Sterling himself." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle. Richard looked like he had been physically struck. He turned to look at Penelope. For the first time, he saw her, not the faded wife or the quiet homemaker, but the architect of his entire life, the silent queen who had let him play king in her castle. The placid lake he'd looked at earlier was a deep, dark ocean, and he was just now realizing he had been drowning in it for 20 years. Her calm wasn't weakness. It was absolute, unshakable power. "Therefore," Judge Davies continued, her voice rising to a declarative boom, "the court finds the following. Sterling Innovations is not a marital asset to be divided. It is and always has been the sole and separate property of Ms. Penelope Hayes." A collective gasp went through the gallery. Mr. Sterling's claims to ownership of the company are hereby dismissed. As he is legally an employee of the company owned by Ms. Hayes, his position, salary, and any bonuses are subject to her discretion as the sole owner and director. As for the division of actual marital assets, those acquired jointly during the marriage outside of the company, that will be divided according to state law. This includes the primary residence, which records show was purchased with funds from Ms. Hayes's personal accounts and other joint investments. The hammer fell. It wasn't just that he had lost the company. He had lost everything. The houses, the jets, the lavish lifestyle, it was all funded by the company. Her company. He wasn't the billionaire owner. He was the overpaid CEO who had just been exposed in the most public way imaginable. His worth wasn't $12 billion. It was effectively zero. Sienna Carmichael stood up so abruptly, her chair scraped loudly against the floor. Without a word, without a single backward glance at the man whose fortune had just vanished, she turned and walked briskly out of the courtroom, her red dress a retreating flag of surrender. The diamond bracelet on her wrist, purchased with corporate funds, now belonged to the woman she had sneered at. Richard Sterling slumped in his chair, a broken man. The reporters in the gallery were scribbling furiously, their faces alight with the story of a lifetime. The Titan had fallen. Judge Davies banged her gavel. "This court is adjourned." The aftermath was a media firestorm. "The Phantom Billionaire," screamed the cover of the Wall Street Journal. "How the CEO's wife was the secret owner all along," read the headline in the New York Times. Richard Sterling's fall from grace was brutal, public, and absolute. He became a cautionary tale, a punchline in late-night monologues. The man who had it all and flew too close to the sun, only to discover the sun was never his to begin with. Stripped of his corporate credit cards, his chauffeured Maybach, and his access to the private jet, he was adrift. Alistair Finch dropped him as a client the next day. His powerful friends stopped returning his calls. He was a pariah. The final divorce settlement left him with a fraction of what he had expected his personal effects, and a small portion of a joint savings account. It was more money than most people see in a lifetime, but for a man accustomed to billions, it was poverty. The day after the verdict, Penelope Hayes walked through the gleaming glass doors of the Sterling Innovations headquarters in Silicon Valley. She was no longer dressed in the muted tones of a courtroom observer. She wore a sharply tailored power suit in a deep shade of sapphire blue, her hair down her stride, confident and purposeful. The lobby fell silent as she entered. Employees who had only ever seen her as the boss's wife at company picnics now stared in awe and confusion. She didn't pause. She walked directly to the bank of private elevators, used her old R&D keycard, which still granted her top-level access, and ascended to the top floor. She stepped out into the opulent executive suite. The vast corner office, with its panoramic views of the valley, was empty. The personal effects, the framed magazine covers, featuring his face, the photos of him, with world leaders, the gaudy sculptures had already been boxed up and removed. All that remained was the desk. Her desk. She walked over and ran a hand over the smooth, polished wood. For 20 years, she had allowed another person to sit here to take credit for her work, her capital, her creation. It had been a choice born of love, then sustained by strategy. Now it was over. Her first act as the official public owner of the company was to call an all-hands meeting. Standing before the thousands of employees who had believed Richard's story, she didn't gloat or denigrate her ex-husband. She simply told the truth. For 20 years, this company has had a public face and a private engine. She said, her voice clear and steady. Today they become one. My name is Penelope Hayes, and I am the founder and owner of this company. Our work in predictive logistics has changed the world, but our potential is even greater. The era of ego is over. The era of true innovation begins now. She immediately fired the sycophants Richard had promoted and elevated the brilliant engineers and strategists, many of them women, whom he had overlooked. She greenlit projects he had dismissed as too risky. She announced a new company name, shedding the one that was now synonymous with disgrace. Sterling Innovations was dead. From its ashes rose Nexus Analytics, a callback to the original name she had given her algorithm in that tiny apartment all those years ago. The company under her focused and visionary leadership didn't just survive, it thrived. The market, initially spooked, responded with overwhelming confidence to the story of the quiet genius finally taking her rightful place. The stock soared. Penelope Hayes never set out for revenge. She had only wanted what was hers. But in reclaiming her company, she reclaimed her life, her identity, and her story. She was no longer Richard Sterling's wife, a footnote in his biography. She was Penelope Hayes, the woman who built an empire in silence, and then, when the time was right, stepped into the light to claim her throne. 6 months had passed since the gavel fell, shattering one life and forging another. The name Sterling was now a toxic asset, a synonym for hubris and public humiliation. In its place, Nexus Analytics was ascending a testament to the quiet, formidable woman who now rightfully occupied the CEO's chair. The world, it turned out, loved the story of the ghost in the machine emerging to claim her kingdom. The company's valuation had not only stabilized, but had climbed by 15%, as Penelope's steady, no-nonsense leadership reassured a market weary of her ex-husband's erratic showmanship. From her office on the 50th floor, Penelope Hayes looked out over the sprawling Silicon landscape. The panoramic view was the same, but the person looking out was entirely different. The weight of her new role was immense. Her days were no longer spent in the quiet solitude of courtroom and data models, but in a relentless whirlwind of board meetings, investor calls, and strategic planning sessions. She was the public face, now the final authority. The buck in its entirety stopped with her. She had just concluded a tense video conference with her new European operations chief, dissecting supply chain vulnerabilities in the Baltic states. She was good at it. Her mind, so adept at seeing patterns in data, could easily see the flow of global commerce. But it was draining in a way her old work never was. The solitude she once cherished was now a luxury. Her intercom buzzed. It was her assistant. "Ms. Hayes, your son Leo is here to see you." A rare, genuine smile touched Penelope's lips. "Send him in, please." Leo, her 20-year-old son, walked in. He had her thoughtful eyes, but Richard's easy charm, a combination that Penelope found both endearing and slightly painful. He was a junior at Stanford, and his visits were her anchor to a world outside of corporate warfare. "Hey, Mom," he said, slumping into one of the plush chairs opposite her massive desk. "This place still looks like a spaceship." "It's a bit much, isn't it?" she conceded. "I'm thinking of redecorating. Less Bond villain, more functional workspace." They talked for a few minutes about his classes and his plans for the summer, but Penelope could sense a tension in him, a familiar unease that had been present since the divorce. "What is it, Leo?" she finally asked gently. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I saw Dad last week." Penelope's posture stiffened slightly. She made it a point never to speak ill of Richard to their children Leo and his younger sister Clara. She wanted them to form their own opinions, but it was difficult. "How is he?" she asked, her voice neutral. "He's different," Leo said, struggling for the right words. "He's living in a condo in Russian Hill. It's nice, but it's not, you know. He talks a lot. About you. About the past." Leo hesitated, then looked at her directly. "Mom, he says you planned it all from the beginning, that you set him up, let him build everything just so you could take it away. He's telling everyone who will listen that he's the victim." Penelope felt a familiar ache. "Leo, what your father and I had. It was complicated. The ownership agreement was a legal necessity at the start. I never intended for this." "But did you have to humiliate him?" Leo pressed his voice, cracking with a son's pain. In court with the mistress there, in front of the whole world. He has nothing left. He made his choices, Leo. Penelope said, her voice firm, but not unkind. He chose to have an affair. He chose to use company money to fund it. He chose to file for divorce and try to leave me with a pittance of what we built. He chose to walk into that courtroom holding her hand. That wasn't my decision. My only choice was whether to lie down and be erased or to stand up and claim what was legally and morally mine. I chose to stand up for myself and for you and Clara. Leo looked down, conflicted. I know. It's just, he's plotting something, Mom. He's not the kind of man who just fades away. He's met someone, not a woman. Some finance guy, a hedge fund manager named Damien Croft. Dad's been feeding him information about Nexus. Penelope felt a chill run down her spine. Damien Croft. The name was infamous. Croft was a corporate raider, a vulture who specialized in hostile takeovers of vulnerable companies. What kind of information? She asked, her mind instantly shifting into strategic mode. I don't know the details, Leo admitted. Just that Dad thinks he's found a way to get justice. He says you're a tech nerd, not a business leader, and that this Croft fellow is going to expose you and take the company apart. The conversation was cut short by the urgent buzz of her private line. It was Ava Chen. That in itself was a warning sign. Ava didn't call unless it was critical. Penelope, Ava's voice was grim. We have a problem. A big one. Meanwhile, in a sleek, minimalist condominium overlooking Alcatraz, Richard Sterling swirled a glass of expensive whiskey he hadn't paid for. He looked thinner, his face etched with a bitterness that had aged him more than the past 10 years of success ever had. He was a king in exile, and he was consumed by a singular burning purpose vengeance. Across from him sat Damien Croft. Croft was a man in his 40s with cold reptilian eyes and an unnerving stillness. He didn't exude power like Richard once had. He absorbed it from the rooms he entered. He was everything Richard wasn't: patient, meticulous, and utterly devoid of ego. Your ex-wife's rebranding has been surprisingly effective, Croft said, his voice a low monotone. The market likes the narrative. The hidden genius story plays well. It's a fraud, Richard spat. She's a backroom coder who got lucky. She can't handle the pressure of a global enterprise. I know her weaknesses. I built that company's infrastructure. I know where the stress points are. For the past 3 months, Richard had been Croft's oracle. He had detailed every acquisition, every international deal, every piece of corporate debt Richard had taken on during his aggressive expansion phase. He painted a picture of a company stretched thin, a house of cards built by his own daring, now being managed by a timid amateur. Her biggest weakness, Richard continued, leaning forward with a conspiratorial gleam in his eye, is that she despises debt. She's risk-averse. I took on billions in leveraged financing to fund the Asian expansion. She never approved. The covenants on those bonds are complex. If the company's bond rating slips even a single grade, it triggers massive penalty clauses. Pressure it, and the whole thing will start to creak. Croft listened, absorbing every word. My fund has been acquiring that debt quietly for months. He revealed a faint smile, touching his thin lips. We now hold a controlling interest in Nexus Analytics' corporate bonds, over 60% of them. Richard's eyes widened. You do? Yes, Croft said. And tomorrow, we will be making a public tender offer to buy the company. It will be a lowball offer, of course. She will reject it. But the offer itself, combined with our position as her primary creditor, will be enough to spook the ratings agencies. We will issue a statement questioning her leadership and the company's future profitability. When the rating slips, the penalties kick in. The stock will plummet. Then we make our real move. Richard felt a surge of euphoric power he hadn't felt in months. He was back in the game. He was pulling the strings. "She won't see it coming," he whispered, a giddy, vicious smile spreading across his face. Back in her office, Penelope listened on the phone as Ava Chen laid out the grim reality. "Croft Capital just announced a hostile tender offer, Penelope. It's all over the financial news. They're citing leadership uncertainty and long-term strategic risk. It's a classic raid. He's trying to weaponize the very debt Richard saddled the company with." Penelope closed her eyes. Leo's warning echoed in her ears. "He's plotting something, Mum. This wasn't just a corporate maneuver. It was Richard's ghost reaching out from his self-imposed exile to tear down everything she had rightfully claimed. He couldn't own it, so he would see it burned to the ground." She ended the call and stood up, walking back to the vast window. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. She had fought and won the battle for her past. She had corrected the record and reclaimed her name. But now a new war was upon her, a war for the future of her company, her legacy. A flicker of the old fire ignited within her. The anger, the shock, it all coalesced into a familiar, cold resolve. Damien Croft thought she was a tech nerd. Richard thought she was a risk-averse amateur. They saw her as the quiet woman from the courtroom. They had no idea who they were dealing with. She turned back to her desk, her expression now hard as diamond. She pulled up every available piece of data on Croft Capital, on their strategies, their holdings, their past raids. The fight wasn't just in the boardroom anymore. It was here in the data. This was her battlefield. "You want a war, Richard?" she whispered to the empty room. "You have no idea how well I know how to fight one." What a story of poetic justice, a man so blinded by his own ego that he forgot the very foundation he was standing on was built, paid for, and owned by the woman he cast aside. Penelope Hayes played the long game, proving that true power isn't always loud. Sometimes it's the quiet, meticulous work done in the shadows, waiting for the perfect moment to be revealed. Richard Sterling wanted to erase his wife from his life, but instead the world erased him from the history of his own company. What do you think? Was Penelope's 2-decade-long secret a brilliant strategic move or a tragedy of stolen credit? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever seen such a complete and total reversal of fortune?
Mistress brags about millionaire husband's diamond ring pregnant wife, gets furious and files for divorce. Caroline Winston never thought she would become that woman, pregnant, heartbroken, and on the brink of divorce. Yet here she was, staring at scandalous photos on social media, her husband's mistress, Megan Hughes, proudly flaunting a diamond ring worth more than most people's homes. As Caroline's unborn child stirred in her belly, fury replaced the numb shock. Her husband, Richard Winston, a millionaire businessman, had dared to shower Megan with lavish gifts while neglecting his pregnant wife. Enough was enough. Determined to protect her future and her child's, Caroline set her sights on one goal: to walk away from Richard's deceit and reclaim her life. Caroline Winston used to love the morning sipping her tea, enjoying the sunlight streaming through the windows of her stately colonial home in Westchester County. She'd once believed she and Richard shared a life built on loyalty and common dreams, a family, thriving careers, the promise of a stable future. But recently, the sense of security she cherished had started to unravel. It began with late-night business dinners Richard claimed were critical, followed by a suspicious perfume lingering on his suit's fragrances Caroline didn't recognize. Then came unexplained charges on their credit card bills at upscale boutiques she'd never heard of. Though pregnant and often battling morning sickness, Caroline's instincts sharpened with worry. She was no fool. At 33, she'd been around the corporate block enough to recognize the red flags. Her mother, Regina Larkson, once told her, "If a man changes his routines without reason, be watchful." Caroline had tried to brush aside the warnings, telling herself that Richard was simply working extra hard to prepare for the baby's arrival. But the anxiety refused to fade. It crept into her mind at midnight, forcing her awake. One drizzly Wednesday, Caroline pushed aside her half-eaten breakfast. The baby kicked gently. She placed a hand on her belly and breathed through a wave of nausea. The ring on her finger, a modest diamond Richard had bought after his first big pay bump, suddenly felt heavy. She remembered how he'd promised a grand upgrade someday when they reached a certain level of financial success. She'd laughed, saying she didn't need extravagance. "All I want," she'd declared, "is a happy marriage and a loving family." Now that promise felt hollow. Later that morning, Caroline attended her monthly prenatal checkup with Dr. Marianne Rothman at the New Hope Women's Clinic. Everything seemed normal for a second trimester pregnancy. Still, Dr. Rothman commented on Caroline's elevated stress levels. "Try to relax," the doctor advised gently, pressing the ultrasound probe against Caroline's stomach. "Stress hormones can affect the baby's development." Caroline nodded, tears pricking her eyes. She realized she needed clarity one way or another. Once home, Caroline sank onto the living room sofa. Their cat, a smoky grey Persian named Jasper, hopped onto her lap. Stroking Jasper's fur, she mulled over the strange tension that had gripped her household for weeks. Richard came home late most nights, reeking of an unfamiliar scent, half-heartedly murmuring excuses. She suspected an affair, but had no concrete proof, only illusions of guilt that gnawed at her. But beneath the worry simmered anger. If Richard truly betrayed her, how dare he do it while she was expecting their child? It was a violation, not just of marital vows, but of everything Caroline believed family should be. A knock at the door startled her from her thoughts. Their housekeeper, Ava Santos, poked her head in. "Sorry to bother you, Mrs. Winston. A delivery arrived. Looks like flowers." Caroline's heart leapt with a glimmer of hope. Maybe Richard sent them as an apology or a romantic gesture. She hurried to the foyer, only to discover an elaborate bouquet of red roses. The card read, "You take my breath away always, monsieur." The initial clearly wasn't R for Richard. This was from someone else to someone else. Had there been a mix-up with deliveries? Confused, Caroline rechecked the address label. Mr. Richard Winston, Redwood Lane. It was correct. The card, however, was not addressed to Caroline. It was addressed to a Megan Hughes. She felt her stomach twist. Red roses from her own husband to another woman, or from some unknown admirer to the mistress? The details were muddled, but the message was clear. Megan was in the picture. Caroline stood in the foyer numb. Just then her phone buzzed. It was a text from Richard, working late. "Don't wait up." That was it. No explanation, no apology for the day's confusion. Fury and heartbreak collided in Caroline's chest. She clenched her fists around the bouquet. Something had to give. She would no longer bury her head in the sand, pretending her marriage was fine. Truth beckoned, however ugly it might be. That evening, Caroline paced the living room, replaying every odd scenario in her head. Over the past month, the anomalies had been stacking up. A new iPhone she discovered on Richard's nightstand that he claimed was a work phone, which he whisked away whenever she entered the room. Lingerie receipts she found in his car, lingerie that certainly wasn't her size. A hotel key card that suspiciously fell out of his pocket one morning. She had confronted him then, but he insisted it belonged to a colleague who needed help with a big conference event. She wanted to believe him, truly. She hadn't married Richard Winston with the intent of becoming a cynic. Years ago, they met at a charity function for the St. Jude Foundation, and he'd been so kind, so supportive. She could still recall him standing on stage, passionately speaking about raising funds for children with cancer, and how that instantly melted her heart. He exuded sincerity and ambition. Caroline, an events coordinator at the time, had fallen head over heels. Their relationship blossomed quickly. They got married amid family and friends cheering them on. She imagined a future brimming with success and children running around their suburban lawn. For a while, that dream felt real, but life had taken a turn. Richard's businesses flourished, and the money came pouring in. He was suddenly a high-powered investor in Manhattan's real estate circles, dining with moguls and traveling for deals. Initially, Caroline was thrilled his success meant more security for their growing family. Yet she saw how wealth changed Richard's priorities. He became restless, always aiming to escalate his status. He started hosting lavish parties, surrounding himself with socialites, eager to impress them with his luxurious lifestyle. One day, Caroline recalled, they had a fight about a yacht party. She was newly pregnant and felt seasick just thinking about it. "You promised to be there," he complained, ignoring her pleas that she couldn't handle waves and loud music. When she stood her ground, he stormed off and left her to fend for herself, making her question if his concern for her and the baby was genuine or simply for show. Now, with the rose bouquet fiasco, Caroline's doubts crystallized. She grew convinced Richard was having an affair. The question was how long it had been going on and whether he'd come clean if pressed. Summoning her courage, she dialed the private investigator recommended by her friend, Linda Freeman. Linda had once discovered her own husband's affair through a PI named Daniel Jenkins, who provided photographic and financial proof. Caroline had never envisioned hiring someone to spy on her spouse, but she felt she had no other choice. "Hello, this is Jenkins," answered a composed male voice. Caroline hesitated, her heart pounding. "Hi, my name is Caroline Winston. I was referred by Linda Freeman. I suspect my husband might be unfaithful, and I need confirmation." They set up a meeting at Jenkins's discreet office on Lexington Avenue. After the call, Caroline sank into the couch, a wave of apprehension washing over her. She felt guilty. Investigating her own husband was a betrayal of trust. But then again, if he was betraying her while she carried his child, did he truly deserve her devotion? Caroline's appointment with Daniel Jenkins came the next day. She traveled into Manhattan, a city that both invigorated and intimidated her with its skyscrapers and bustling energy. She had to pause mid-commute when her baby decided to deliver a few sharp kicks, gentle reminders that she couldn't remain in denial. This wasn't just her fight. She was fighting for her child's future too. Jenkins's office was on the 10th floor of a modest building. Inside, she found a neatly arranged space. A man in his late 40s with salt and pepper hair greeted her politely. "Mistress Winston, come in." He offered her a seat in a small conference room. After exchanging niceties, Caroline explained everything: the suspicious phone, the unaccounted-for charges, and especially the roses addressed to Megan Hughes. Jenkins scribbled notes in a leather-bound notebook, occasionally adjusting his reading glasses. "I'll need your husband's schedule, details on his vehicles, known associates, and any social media handles," Jenkins said matter-of-factly. Caroline slid over a file containing Richard's general routine, recent bank statements, and phone records. "Whatever it takes," she said, trembling slightly. "I just need to know the truth." Jenkins nodded. "We'll begin surveillance immediately. If I find evidence of an affair, I can compile it into a report. Should you decide to proceed legally, this evidence may help." Caroline clenched her fists. "I'm not sure if I'll go that far, but I can't stay in the dark anymore." That night, she returned home to find Richard in a strangely chipper mood, his suit jacket tossed over a chair, tie loosened. He greeted her with a kiss on the cheek. "Hey, honey, how was your day?" His warmth felt forced, like an actor performing a role. Her pregnancy glow might have masked her turmoil, but she was boiling inside, especially when she noticed a fresh whiff of perfume clinging to his shirt. Caroline mustered a smile, though her pulse raced. "Tiring," she replied. "I'm not feeling too well." She prayed he wouldn't see through her facade. She doubted he suspected she'd hired a detective. He seemed too self-absorbed to imagine she'd fight back. Over dinner takeout from their favorite Thai place, Richard spoke animatedly about an upcoming business trip to Miami. He emphasized how crucial it was for sealing the biggest deal of his life. Caroline played along, but her mind churned with suspicion. Was Megan going with him? Were they planning a secret getaway? Her stomach twisted in knots. She could barely touch her food. 2 days later, Jenkins called. "Miss S. Winston, I have something for you. I'll email you a file tonight." Caroline's throat tightened. She waited with dread until she saw the email notification ping on her phone. Opening it, she found a series of photos. The first showed Richard at a fancy restaurant La Boheme downtown, smiling across the table at an attractive blonde woman. Caroline scrolled through more images, him placing a hand on the woman's lower back, them entering a hotel together, arms linked. The timestamp read exactly the date and hour he told Caroline he was in a business meeting. Her stomach lurched. She recognized the woman, not personally, but from online gossip circles that occasionally featured real estate bigwigs and their glamorous companions. Megan Hughes, a socialite rumored to have multiple wealthy boyfriends. Caroline gazed at the final photo. Megan's ring finger sported a large diamond, and Richard was gently kissing her hand in front of the hotel's entrance. Caroline's heart pounded with betrayal and fury. She might have suspected it, but seeing proof confirmed the nightmare. She sat there, tears slipping down her cheeks, whispering, "So it's true." Her mind fogged over, but her baby's gentle kick snapped her back to reality. She wasn't alone in this. She had to protect her child from the lies. She spent the next hour sobbing into a pillow, her world collapsing. Then a steely resolve took hold. She wouldn't let Richard's infidelity define her future. If Megan Hughes wanted to brag about her stolen diamond ring, she could, but Caroline wouldn't stand for it anymore. She would not be humiliated or cast aside. She deserved better, and so did her unborn child. A week slipped by in a blur of tears and consultations with Jenkins about how best to proceed if Caroline decided to divorce Richard. At times she felt dizzy from it all, the betrayal, the pregnancy, the swirling thoughts of what if I'd been more attentive, or could I have prevented this somehow? She vacillated between heartbreak and anger. Beneath it all lay a simmering determination not to let Richard or Megan trample her dignity. On a chilly Saturday morning, Caroline was browsing her phone when a message popped up from Linda Freeman. "Caroline, you won't believe Megan's post on Instagram. I'm DMing you the link." Heart racing, Caroline opened it. There, in a curated flurry of glitz, Megan Hughes showcased a massive diamond ring on her left hand. Captioned, "When your man knows how to spoil you, #diamonds area girl's best friend, #blessed." Caroline felt the blood drain from her face. The background was the lobby of the Regal, a 5-star hotel in the heart of Manhattan. She recognized the marble columns from Jenkins's photos. The ring was enormous, far larger than the ring on Caroline's own finger. Immediately, Caroline's phone started lighting up with messages from acquaintances and even distant relatives. "Isn't that Richard's rumored mistress? So sorry you have to see this. Are you okay?" You need to leave him, and so on. Her hand trembled as she scrolled through comments on Meghan's post, many from strangers congratulating her, others gossiping about which wealthy man had footed the bill. Some comments even speculated about Richard Winston, referencing rumored sightings. Meghan never directly named him, but the subtext was clear to anyone in the know. The smugness radiated from every photo. Fury burned in Caroline's chest. Her cheeks flushed hot with embarrassment. How dare Meghan flaunt this ill-gotten prize, especially when Caroline was pregnant with the man's child? The affair was vile enough, but to boast publicly about the diamond ring? It was a brazen attempt to dethrone Caroline as Richard's wife. She fought back tears, refusing to let Meghan see her crumble. Later that night, she confronted Richard in their living room. He'd just returned from work, suspiciously smelling of champagne. Caroline stood, arms folded, phone in hand. Care to explain this? She thrust the screen toward him, showing Meghan's Instagram post. Richard froze. His face paled. Caroline, it's not she's exaggerating. I didn't buy her that ring, he stammered, though the guilt was obvious. You expect me to believe that? Are you seriously going to stand there and lie? She glared at him, adrenaline surging. I have proof you've been seeing her. Stop denying it. He swallowed hard. I made a mistake, he began, stumbling over his words. It just happened once, twice. It wasn't supposed to go this far. Caroline's voice trembled with rage. You have a pregnant wife at home and you're giving diamonds to another woman? How far did you plan to take it, Richard? He ran a hand through his hair, desperation in his eyes. Caroline, the first, messed up. But it doesn't have to end us. She's nobody, just a fling. I love you. His voice cracked. A bitter laugh escaped Caroline's lips. Then why is she acting like she's engaged to you? Why are you so absent from our life? Why are you never here for doctor's appointments or to talk about the baby's future? Richard tried to approach her, hands outstretched, but she stepped back. Don't touch me, she hissed, tears slipping down her cheeks. I can't believe you. I can't look at you. I'm done playing the good wife while you flaunt your cheating. He reached for her again, but she sidestepped him, voice trembling. If you won't leave, then I will. But mark my words, you're going to regret what you've done, because you're not only losing me, you're losing this family we planned. She stormed into the bedroom, slammed the door, and locked it, chest heaving. Outside, she heard Richard's muffled pleas, but she covered her ears, refusing to let him manipulate her again. Inside her womb, the baby stirred, perhaps sensing Caroline's turmoil. She gently placed a hand over her belly, vowing she'd protect her child from this toxic environment. In the darkness, her tears ran hot. She was terrified and furious, but resolved. The mistress could keep her diamond ring. Caroline would keep her pride and build a new future without Richard Winston, no matter how painful that journey might be. Days passed in a haze of avoidance. Richard vacated the house early in the mornings and returned after midnight, presumably staying with Meghan or hiding in some luxury hotel. Caroline no longer cared enough to ask. Each day her resolve to leave solidified, fueled by fresh humiliations. Strangers sent her pitying messages online, whispering about how everyone knew Richard was carrying on with Meghan. She discovered that the ring's rumored price tag was upwards of $150,000, a shocking sum he'd never even considered spending on his own wife. During one sleepless night, Caroline rummaged through financial records. To her horror, she realized that Richard had drained a sizable portion of their joint savings to buy the ring money that was supposed to help with hospital bills, the baby's nursery, and future college funds. This new betrayal felt like a dagger through her heart. She couldn't sit by while he squandered their child's security on a mistress's jewelry. Early one morning, Caroline made an appointment with a prominent divorce attorney named Natalie Pierce. Natalie came highly recommended by Linda Freeman, who had navigated a similarly messy situation. Walking into the sleek law firm on Fifth Avenue, Caroline's heart pounded. She couldn't believe it had come to this, but each step closer felt like reclaiming her agency. Natalie Pierce was a sharp, polished woman in her mid-30s. She wore a crisp navy suit and offered Caroline a compassionate smile. "I've reviewed the details you sent," Natalie began, gesturing for Caroline to sit. "You have ample grounds for a divorce, especially given the financial improprieties and infidelity. The main question is how to proceed to protect your best interests." Caroline took a shaky breath. "I want out, but I also want to ensure my baby and I are cared for. What can we do?" Natalie leaned forward. "We can file on grounds of adultery and dissipation of marital assets. Given his net worth, you should seek substantial alimony and child support. We'll also freeze certain assets to prevent him from moving funds offshore or hiding them." It felt surreal, discussing a divorce strategy like a business deal. Yet, Caroline knew it was necessary. "He'll fight back," she warned. "He's proud and manipulative." Natalie nodded. "That's typical. But we have strong evidence, your private investigator's photos, the bank transfers for that diamond ring. Judges don't look kindly on extravagantly funding a mistress while neglecting a pregnant spouse. I can't promise a smooth road, but your case is solid." Caroline's voice trembled with gratitude and fear. "Thank you. Let's do this." Before she left, Natalie handed her a stack of documents to sign. The formality of each signature made Caroline's stomach twist in knots. She was genuinely terrified of the emotional fallout that would come once Richard realized how serious she was about divorcing. But her child's future and her own well-being demanded immediate action. That night, she found the courage to tell him. He arrived home unexpectedly at 9, stumbling slightly likely from an expensive dinner or post-work drinks. The tension was thick as Caroline confronted him in the foyer, arms crossed. "I spoke to a lawyer," she said, voice trembling but determined. "I'm filing for divorce." Richard's face paled. "Caroline, wait, don't do anything rash." She lifted a brow. "You think this is rash? You've flaunted your affair in public, wasted our joint savings on an obscene ring, and left me to deal with this pregnancy alone. I'm done, Richard." His eyes flashed with anger, then softened as though he might attempt the contrite husband act. "What about the baby? We can't break up our family." Caroline's lips tightened. "You broke it. You chose Megan over me, over your unborn child. I'll make sure you still have a chance to be in the baby's life. But as for us, we're finished." He lunged to grab her hands, but she pulled back, an instinctive wave of revulsion coursing through her. She'd shed too many tears, endured too many humiliations. There was no going back. His eyes narrowed. "You're making a huge mistake. Megan is she's nothing," he argued, but the ring and the nightly escapades said otherwise. Caroline felt a sudden calmness in her rage. "If she's nothing, then you threw away everything for nothing," she said, turning her back on him, walking upstairs. She needed to rest, for the baby's sake and for the long legal road ahead. Behind her, she heard Richard curse, banging a fist on the wall in frustration, but she didn't look back. She silently prayed for strength. She was choosing to walk her own path, free of deception, even if it meant facing an uncertain future as a single mother. At least she would have her dignity, and that was the final straw. The next morning, Caroline woke early. Her eyes were swollen from crying, and the baby kept shifting in her womb, as if agitated by her stress. She gingerly rose from bed and headed downstairs, half expecting to find Richard passed out on the sofa. Instead, she discovered he had left at dawn. The house felt cold and empty, reminding her that she was effectively alone now. Still, a faint sense of relief accompanied the loneliness. She didn't have to face his excuses or manipulations for the moment. Feeling drained but resolute, Caroline checked her phone. Dozens of messages flooded in, some from concerned relatives, others from acquaintances who had caught wind of the drama. Her cousin, Gabriela Mendez, a sharp-witted journalist, had texted, "If you need me to run a story about that vile mistress, just say the word. I'll roast them." Caroline managed a small smile at the offer, though she wasn't sure a public scandal would help her mental health or her baby's well-being. She did, however, accept an invitation from Linda Freeman to meet for coffee. They chose a cozy cafe called The Brew and Bloom, a place with pastel decor and sweet pastries, exactly what Caroline needed for comfort. She arrived, noticing Linda waving from a corner table. Linda's expression radiated concern as Caroline approached. Once seated, Linda reached over and squeezed Caroline's hand. "How are you holding up, sweetie?" Caroline tried to smile, but her eyes grew moist. "I've been better," she admitted. "I filed for divorce, Linda. I never imagined this would be my life, especially not while pregnant. But I had no choice." Linda nodded sympathetically, her bright red hair framing her warm, empathetic gaze. "I'm proud of you. It's not easy, but it's brave. I've been there, remember, when Mark left me for that paralegal. I thought my world had ended. But trust me, life goes on, and you'll find a new purpose." Caroline's heart lifted slightly. She recalled how devastated Linda had been, yet she emerged stronger, eventually meeting someone who valued her deeply. "I just worry about raising this baby alone," Caroline confessed, stirring her herbal tea. "I envisioned a family, 2 parents in one home. Now, everything is shattered." Linda leaned forward. "Listen, a single-parent home filled with love and stability is better than a 2-parent home plagued by deceit and fighting. You'll give your child all the love and care needed. And you'll have help. I'm here. Your family's here. You're not alone." Emotions welled up, but Caroline nodded gratefully. They talked about the next steps in divorce proceedings, about how Caroline could gather emotional support. Linda even recommended a prenatal yoga class that had helped her friend manage stress during a high-tension pregnancy. As they finished their drinks, Caroline felt a surge of resolve. She was not powerless. She had allies, a supportive family, and enough resources to protect herself and the baby from Richard's worst. That resolve was tested later that afternoon when Caroline received an unexpected call from an unknown number. She picked up, only to hear a smug female voice. "Hello, Caroline. It's Megan Hughes." Caroline's stomach clenched. She gripped the phone, glancing around her living room as if Megan might pop out of a closet. "What do you want?" Caroline asked, her tone icy. "I'm calling to clarify some things," Megan said, voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "Richard told me you're divorcing him. I just wanted to make sure you understand that he and I are going to be together no matter what." Caroline bristled. It took every ounce of self-control not to unleash a torrent of insults. "It's none of my concern who he chooses, Megan. I filed for divorce because he's a cheating liar." "Congratulations on inheriting that problem." Megan laughed softly. "Oh, I'm not worried. He's signing over certain assets to me to ensure I'm comfortable. But you're pregnant and left in the dust. That can't feel good." A wave of righteous anger coursed through Caroline. "You're deluded if you think I'll be the one left empty-handed. My lawyer is already on it, and trust me, the court won't look kindly on a man who abandons his pregnant wife to splurge on a mistress." Silence hummed over the line. When Megan spoke again, the saccharine tone was gone. "Richard owes me, Caroline. If you push too hard for his money, you'll make an enemy of me. And I can be very persuasive, especially with the media." Caroline's heart pounded. She took a deep breath. "You're threatening me because you want to protect your ill-gotten finances? Good luck. I'm not scared of you. The truth is on my side, and I have the receipts to prove it." Megan hissed, "Fine. Do what you must. Just remember, I won't let you or anyone else ruin what Richard and I have." She hung up, leaving Caroline's ears ringing with the menacing vow. Caroline stood frozen, phone in hand, a swirl of fury and defiance fueling her. She whispered to herself, "She's underestimating me." If Megan Hughes thought she could bully a pregnant woman into submission, she was in for a rude awakening. Caroline had endured enough heartbreak. Now, she would show them both that she wasn't someone to be trifled with. The day of the preliminary divorce hearing dawned under a grey sky, spitting cold rain. Caroline braced herself for the event, dressing in a simple black maternity dress that flattered her growing belly. Anxiety fluttered through her stomach. This was her first time stepping into a courtroom for something so personal. But she reminded herself that this step was crucial for reclaiming her life and securing her child's future. Natalie Pierce met her at the courthouse entrance, providing a steady presence. "We have enough evidence to push for a favorable settlement, so don't worry," she assured Caroline. "Stay calm, answer honestly if addressed, and let me handle the rest." Caroline nodded, swallowing her nerves. As they walked into the corridor, she spotted Richard, flanked by his lawyer, a tall, stern-faced man named Gerald Stark. She also noticed Megan Hughes, lurking a few steps behind, draped in an ostentatious fur coat despite the mild weather. When their eyes met, Megan gave her a smug, half-smile, wiggling her diamond-ringed fingers. Caroline turned away, refusing to play into the mistress's taunts. In the small hearing room, both parties sat at opposing tables. The judge, an older woman with sharp eyes, called the session to order. Natalie presented a concise summary of Caroline's complaints: infidelity, dissipation of marital assets, emotional distress, and the need for child support. She also argued that Caroline should retain the marital home, as it provided stability for the impending baby. Gerald Stark rebutted by downplaying Richard's affair, labeling it a personal indiscretion that bore little relevance to the financial aspects. He claimed that the diamond ring purchase was Richard's personal expenditure, separate from marital funds. He insisted that Caroline's demands for alimony and child support were exorbitant, given that she came from an upper-middle-class background and had potential earning power as an event planner. Caroline's anger flared, but she kept her composure, remembering Natalie's advice. When she was called to speak, she explained, voice trembling, that she had left full-time work at Richard's request to focus on the pregnancy. She had done so assuming they were a team, only to discover he was funneling money into grandiose gifts for a mistress. She reiterated her concerns about the baby's well-being. "I will not allow my child's financial security to be jeopardized by my husband's extravagant spending on another woman," she concluded, her eyes bright with unshed tears. Richard was called to speak next. He looked uncharacteristically haggard, dark circles under his eyes. "I made mistakes," he admitted, shifting uncomfortably, "but I still love my wife. I'd like to work things out." His contrite tone grated on Caroline. Just days ago, he'd been partying with Megan. Now, he was claiming regret. She suspected it was a ploy to reduce the divorce settlement. He then argued that the ring's payment came from his personal investment gains. "It wasn't from our joint account," he insisted. "I have the statements to prove it." But Natalie was quick to highlight large, unexplained withdrawals that preceded the ring's purchase. The judge listened intently, occasionally glancing at the documents each lawyer submitted. When the hearing concluded, the judge set another date for further proceedings, instructing both sides to gather more evidence of asset distribution. In the interim, the judge ruled that Richard must continue paying the mortgage on the marital home, as Caroline needed stability for her pregnancy. She also set a temporary support order so Caroline could manage living expenses. Richard's financial obligations started that very week, Outside the courtroom, Megan wasted no time. She sauntered up to Caroline, flipping her glossy hair. How does it feel to cling to him like this? Accepting his money after you tossed him out? Caroline blinked, momentarily stunned. I'm not clinging. The court recognized that a pregnant woman deserves financial support from the man who helped create this baby. It's called responsibility. She turned to walk away, but Megan grabbed her arm. Let go of me, Caroline hissed, yanking free. Some passers-by turned to watch the commotion. Megan's voice turned venomous. Richard is mine now. The only reason he's playing the remorseful husband card is to save face in court. Once this is over, he'll be free and you'll be left with your pity money. Caroline's blood boiled. But before she could respond, Linda Freeman appeared from behind, stepping between them. If I were you, Linda told Megan icily, I'd worry less about harassing a pregnant woman and more about how quickly your sugar daddy might dump you if the law clamps down on his finances. Megan scowled, eyes darting to Richard, who stood by the exit, pinned under Gerald Stark's stern talk. She stomped away without another word. Caroline felt her heart pounding, tears close to the surface. But she steadied herself, grateful for Linda's timely intervention. Thank you, she breathed. Linda patted her shoulder. That woman has some nerve. Don't let her get to you. You're doing what's right for you and the baby. Caroline exhaled, nodding. The first legal skirmish was over, but the war was far from finished. Still, she felt a rush of empowerment. The judge's acknowledgement of her rights, Linda's unwavering friendship, and the baby's resolute kicks in her belly reminded her that she was no victim. She was fighting for her future, and she was determined to win. In the days following the preliminary hearing, tension escalated in the Winston household. Richard, still technically co-owner of their home, made surprise visits to gather belongings. Each time, the encounters with Caroline erupted in arguments. Sometimes he insisted he'd changed and wanted her back. Other times, he accused her of greed and spite. His mercurial behavior left Caroline on edge. One Saturday morning, as Caroline was sorting baby clothes in the nursery, she heard the front door bang open. Richard's voice echoed down the hall. She tensed he hadn't given any notice of coming by. Bracing herself, she walked into the living room to find him rummaging through drawers. "What are you doing?" she demanded, arms crossed over her pregnant belly. He glanced up, face flushed. "I'm looking for some paperwork. I have every right to be here." Caroline's pulse quickened, but she willed herself to remain calm. "I told you to text or call before coming. This stress isn't good for me or the baby." Richard sneered. "Since when do you care about my stress? You're the one who's milking the courts for every dollar." She bristled. "I'm not milking anything. I'm fighting for what's fair for our child. If you don't want to support me, at least support your baby." He scoffed, slamming a drawer shut. "That child is mine too. Once it's born, I'll do my part. But I'm not going to let you bankrupt me." Caroline's voice trembled with rage. "If you're so worried about finances, maybe you shouldn't have dropped a fortune on Megan's ring." His expression darkened at the mention of Megan. "She's different. She appreciates me." He paused, running a frustrated hand through his hair. "But I never wanted it to go this far. I never wanted to lose you." A bitter laugh escaped her. "Then you shouldn't have cheated." She motioned toward the door. "Just go, Richard." He hesitated, glancing around the living room where they once cuddled to watch movies, celebrating birthdays and anniversaries. A flicker of regret crossed his features. For a fleeting moment, Caroline felt an ache for the man she once loved, the man who might have been a good father. But that man had become a stranger. Richard sighed. "You know, this is all your fault, too. You became so focused on the baby you forgot about me." The words cut deep, and Caroline felt a wave of nausea, part pregnancy-related, part emotional shock. She steadied herself against the couch. "I'm pregnant with your child," she retorted, voice shaky. If you can't handle your wife focusing on a baby, that says more about you than me." Without waiting for his reply, she turned and walked away, retreating to the nursery. Behind her, she heard him curse, rummage a bit more, then storm out. When the front door slammed, she allowed herself to weep. It wasn't just heartbreak, it was the betrayal, the blame shifting, the cruel notion that she was somehow at fault for devoting attention to a baby they both agreed to have. She sank into the rocking chair, tears dripping onto the soft pink blanket she'd folded for her daughter. She'd recently learned the baby was a girl during an ultrasound. She whispered, "I'm sorry you have to feel all this, but I promise I'll keep you safe." Gently stroking her belly, she closed her eyes and forced her breathing to slow. The house felt emptier than ever. In that moment, she resolved to accelerate the divorce proceedings if possible. She couldn't keep confronting him in this toxic cycle of blame. The child deserved a peaceful environment, and every day that passed with Richard's looming presence threatened that peace. Word spread quickly that the divorce between Richard and Caroline Winston was turning ugly. Gossip columns relished the story, the pregnant wife scorned, the mistress who boasted a diamond ring. Even tabloids like the New York Daily Star published headlines, "Millionaire mogul's affair sparks nasty divorce. Pregnant wife takes him to court." For Caroline, the exposure felt invasive. She only left the house for doctor's appointments, legal meetings, and occasionally to see supportive friends like Linda. When she did, curious onlookers or reporters tried to snap photos. She wore oversized sunglasses and scarves to conceal her identity, but the stress mounted. One afternoon, she received a call from her cousin Gabriella, who sounded breathless. "Caroline, check the gossip sites. Megan Hughes is publicly airing her grievances against you." She gave some interview full of lies. Heart pounding, Caroline opened her laptop. Sure enough, on an entertainment website, she found an article titled, "Megan Hughes Speaks Her Truth. The Wife Bullied Me from Day One." In it, Megan painted herself as a misunderstood lover who fell in love with Richard after his wife neglected him. She claimed Caroline threatened and harassed her, forced Richard to buy gifts out of fear. She'd smear his reputation. Megan even hinted that Caroline's pregnancy was planned to trap Richard, a statement so vile that Caroline almost threw her laptop in rage. She called Linda, voice shaking. "Can you believe the nerve of this woman? She's lying to the press, acting like she's the victim." Linda tried to reassure her. "It's a tactic, Caroline. She's trying to sway public opinion, maybe hoping it helps Richard's side in court. Don't stoop to her level. Keep building a strong legal case." Later that day, Caroline met with Natalie Pierce to discuss the recent developments. Natalie sighed upon hearing Megan's claims. "We can't control the media, but we can control the narrative in court. I advise you not to respond publicly. Let Megan rant. The real battle is in the judge's chamber." Caroline nodded wearily. "It's just exhausting to see her tarnish my name. I'm pregnant. I don't need this stress." Natalie gave her a sympathetic look. "I understand. Let's shift focus to finalizing the financial records. We've subpoenaed the jewelry store for the receipt of that diamond ring. If it shows a debit from any joint account, that's a significant point in our favor." They compiled more documents, highlighting suspicious transfers from Richard's business accounts to personal accounts, hinting that he might be hiding money. Meanwhile, Jenkins, the private investigator, uncovered that Megan had a history of latching onto wealthy men and leaving once their funds dried up. He provided statements from previous boyfriends, describing how Megan manipulated them into buying expensive gifts before abruptly vanishing. Armed with this intel, Caroline felt renewed determination. If Megan planned to drag her name through the mud, Caroline would respond by unveiling the mistress's manipulative track record in court. Caroline herself intended to remain above the public fray, refusing to give tabloids an inflammatory quote. Despite the chaos, Caroline found solace in small joys, folding tiny onesies, picking out pastel colors for the nursery walls, even sharing baby name ideas with Linda. She refused to let Meghan's vendetta overshadow the excitement of welcoming a new life. Yes, this pregnancy was marred by heartbreak and stress, but it was also a beacon of hope for Caroline, a reminder that love and innocence still existed. She did worry about how the negative press might affect her daughter in the future. Children sometimes learn of their parents' conflicts. But Caroline resolved that one day she'd explain, gently, why she had to stand up for herself and her child. She'd emphasize that no one should remain in a marriage built on betrayal and manipulation. The next court date loomed, promising more conflict. Still, Caroline clung to the belief that truth would prevail. Meghan Hughes could flaunt her diamond ring and spin her sob story, but the legal system wouldn't be swayed by gossip columns. For the sake of the baby, Caroline was determined to see justice served no matter how loudly the mistress fought back. The second major court date arrived on a crisp morning. Caroline wore a tailored navy maternity dress that felt empowering. She was nearly 7 months pregnant now, her belly unmistakable. The baby was active, reminding her at every turn that she had a precious life, depending on her strength. Natalie Pierce walked by her side as they entered the courthouse. Just before stepping into the courtroom, Caroline caught sight of Richard and Meghan. The mistress had the audacity to show up again, this time wearing a tight designer dress and flaunting the enormous diamond ring. Caroline's stomach churned, but she lifted her chin, refusing to cower. Once seated, the judge wasted no time. We're here to address the financial disclosures, marital asset division, and the legitimacy of certain expenditures in light of Miss S. Winston's pregnancy and Mr. Winston's admitted infidelity. Natalie presented evidence from the jewelry store subpoena. It conclusively showed that $75,000 came from the Winstons' joint account funds, originally earmarked for the baby's expenses. Although the ring had cost more, the store's records were enough to prove that part of the purchase used marital resources. Caroline's fury flared anew, imagining how many baby essentials that $75,000 could have covered. Gerald Stark tried to deflect, arguing that Richard had replenished the account with his personal investments. But Natalie countered that the deposit Richard made arrived after Caroline filed for divorce, possibly an attempt to mask the wrongdoing. The judge frowned, demanding more clarity from Richard. As Richard fumbled through explanations, Meghan, seated behind the defense table, kept tossing haughty looks at Caroline. Several times, the judge had to request decorum. The tension crackled in the air. Caroline's turn came to speak about the stress she endured. She described how, at a crucial time in her pregnancy, she had to navigate discovering her husband's affair, Meghan's public taunts, and financial insecurity. She explained how the diverted funds threatened her prenatal care. Her voice caught as she recounted the emotional pain, but she pressed on, determined to show the court that she wasn't overreaching, she merely wanted justice for her unborn child and herself. Finally, the judge addressed Richard. Mr. Winston, the evidence suggests you used joint funds for a personal affair. You also left your pregnant wife with limited support while you maintained a second relationship. This court must consider the unborn child's interests as paramount. I'm inclined to grant Miss S. Winston a significant portion of the marital assets to ensure the child's welfare. Gerald Stark interjected, trying to lessen the blow, but the judge was firm. She scheduled a final hearing to finalize the property division and child support arrangements, stating, "Unless there's a stark turnaround in evidence, I see no reason to alter this course." Caroline's spirits soared. Megan, on the other hand, looked like she'd swallowed a lemon. She shot daggers at Caroline, no doubt seething that her gravy train might be curtailed. Richard sank in his chair, shoulders slumped, as reality began to settle upon him. Outside the courtroom, the press waited. Natalie whisked Caroline past them with a quick, no comment. But a few reporters shouted questions, peppering them with rumors about Megan's meltdown inside. Caroline glimpsed Richard and Megan behind them, locked in what appeared to be a heated argument. She overheard Megan hiss, "I won't be left with nothing," before the crowd closed in around them. By the time Caroline and Natalie reached the street, her heart was pounding. "We're in a good position," Natalie said, gently guiding her away from the media scrum. "Stay strong. The next hearing should seal the settlement." Caroline exhaled shakily, pressing a hand to her belly. The baby kicked, as if cheering her on. She allowed herself a small smile. For all the heartbreak, the legal battles, and public humiliation, she was on the cusp of securing a stable future for herself and her daughter. Caroline found herself 8 months pregnant, exhausted from the endless legal wrangling and media scrutiny that had plagued her for weeks. The second major hearing had ended with the judge warning her estranged husband, Richard, that misusing joint funds for a mistress would not go unpunished. Now, as she waited for the final court date, she felt both anxious and oddly relieved that an end was in sight. Her divorce attorney, Natalie Pierce, kept her informed about every development, from Richard's attempts to shift money around to the documents needed to finalize the settlement. Caroline tried to focus on her impending motherhood, but she battled late-night doubts. Each time the baby shifted or kicked, a wave of protectiveness surged in her. This child deserved stability, something her current circumstances lacked. She had little appetite for the tabloids' daily rants about the pregnant wife scorned and the diamond-flaunting mistress. She simply wanted to leave the betrayal behind. Her friend Linda Freeman often dropped by with groceries or prepared meals, determined to ease the burden. One afternoon, Linda arrived cradling a small box wrapped in pastel ribbon. Inside was a handmade baby blanket, embroidered with the name Caroline had chosen weeks earlier, Sophie Winston. Caroline felt tears burn her eyes. Seeing her daughter's name in delicate pink thread transformed the swirl of anxieties into renewed hope, Linda told her. A single-parent home can be a sanctuary if it's filled with love and honesty. Caroline clung to those words, reminding herself that her strength would guide Sophie into a bright future. Meanwhile, rumors flew that Richard was under severe financial strain, caught between legal obligations and a mistress demanding more gifts to maintain her lavish lifestyle. Caroline learned from their private investigator that Megan Hughes might have threatened to expose even more about Richard's personal dealings if he failed to keep her satisfied. Though Caroline's sympathies had run dry, she found a grim satisfaction in knowing that Richard's choices were catching up to him. Then came the day before the final hearing, when Caroline agreed to meet Richard in a public cafe. He looked disheveled, tie askew, eyes hollow. Over a half-finished cup of coffee, he claimed he was ending things with Megan. "She's toxic," he said, voice trembling. "We've been tearing each other apart." When he suggested they might reconcile, Caroline felt a flash of the old pain. She shook her head. "There's no going back. We can try to co-parent, but I can't trust you again." He stared at her pregnant belly, tears flickering in his eyes, then quietly nodded. The following morning, Caroline headed to the courthouse under a crisp April sky. She wore a loose-fitting dress that accommodated her bump. Every step reminded her how close she was to meeting Sophie. Linda and Natalie supported her as they passed through the media throng, ignoring intrusive questions. Inside, she found Richard slumped at the defense table, looking resigned. This time, Megan was conspicuously absent. Once proceedings began, Natalie methodically presented the evidence. Bank statements showing Richard's extravagant spending, testimony confirming he'd left Caroline without adequate financial security, and clear proof he'd used shared funds for Meghan's diamond ring. Gerald Stark, Richard's lawyer, tried to mitigate the damage, but the judge was unmoved. She declared Caroline entitled to retain the house and a sizable lump sum payment for the stress and hardships endured during pregnancy. Monthly child support would commence the moment Sophie was born. The judge further affirmed joint legal custody, but physical custody would remain primarily with Caroline, ensuring stability for mother and child. A stunned silence followed. Richard looked toward Caroline, and for a brief moment she saw genuine remorse etched in his face. She managed a small nod. There was no victory in the destruction of their marriage, only the closure she needed to protect herself and Sophie. Exiting the courthouse, Caroline felt an overwhelming sense of relief. The process had been grueling, but now she could finally breathe. "I'm proud of you," Linda whispered as they ducked into a taxi, leaving Richard behind with his regrets and the media's endless curiosity. In that quiet cab ride home, Caroline placed a hand over her belly, promising Sophie a peaceful life, untainted by betrayal and self-doubt. A few weeks later, Caroline went into labor late one night. Linda rushed her to the hospital, where she endured hours of contractions before finally meeting her daughter's gaze. In that instant, Sophie blinking up at her under the bright maternity ward lights, Caroline felt a love so fierce it eclipsed the heartbreak she'd endured. When Richard arrived the next day, looking awkward and unsure, Caroline allowed him a brief visit. She reminded him that if he wanted a role in Sophie's life, he'd need to be responsible, honest, and consistent. Returning home with her newborn, Caroline settled into a new routine. The nursery's pastel colors and the gentle hush of lullabies offered a stark contrast to the turmoil she'd faced. She rocked Sophie in her arms, breathing in the baby's sweet scent, and realized that this was her true new beginning, a chance to create a home grounded in love, stability, and respect. Whatever storms had raged around her, they now felt distant. The diamond ring, the media frenzy, Meghan's flaunting they had lost their power to wound her. In their place stood Caroline's unwavering resolve to give Sophie a life brimming with hope, honesty, and a mother's unfaltering devotion. Thank you for joining us on this roller coaster of secrets, betrayal, and hard-won freedom. Caroline's journey shows how life can shatter our expectations in the most painful ways, yet also how the fierce love for an unborn child and the support of trusted allies can pave a way forward. When faced with a mistress flaunting a diamond ring and a once loving husband turned distant, Caroline chose courage. She filed for divorce to protect her future and her baby's well-being, proving that no shiny trinket compares to self-respect and the promise of a peaceful home.